Right, so good morning, good afternoon, or indeed good evening to all of you, depending on where you are joining us from today. And welcome to the second part of our 4-part webinar series here at Canidia Bioscience. These bite-sized sessions have been designed to provide a better understanding of some of the key issues to help aid you and your colleagues or clients make more informed decisions regarding the management of microbial contamination. In the last session, we focused on the collection of fuel samples and on some basic steps to help avoid cross-contamination. This session will focus on the next step, testing, and we will introduce lateral flow testing, also known as antibody testing. And this technology's ability to provide operations with a rapid first line of defense in the early detection and monitoring of microbial contamination. I'm sure this is something that will be useful to all of us to understand and familiarize ourselves with, as it's becoming a commonplace tool for the mass testing of coronavirus. So my name is Maddy Lewis, and I am a research and development scientist at the Canidia Labs, and I have the pleasure of presenting to you all today. For the next 20 minutes, we are going to try and highlight how antibody testing, whilst different to many other forms of testing, can be used as a fast and simple method for providing a first line of defense for microbial testing on site without the need for additional equipment or waiting times. We will begin with a brief overview of our last session, as representative sample collection still remains the linchpin for any testing process. We will follow with a basic overview of what microbiological contamination is without diving too deep into the technical field microbiology. We will explain what antibody testing is and give a couple of examples of how it is used in other industries, such as medicine. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how not all organisms are harmful to fuel. So why would you want to find and act upon them? And finally, how the concept of antibody testing your fuel systems using FUELSTAT could help reduce maintenance costs by ignoring stray, non-fuel degrading organisms. In the last session, we looked at the beginning of the microbiological testing process, obtaining a sample. Specifically, obtaining a sample that is representative of what is happening in your fuel system. In short, a good process would be, where practical, regularly remove as much water as possible. Water is necessary for life and is often the root cause of microbiological contamination. Ensure drain points and sampling equipment are clean and that samples taken are from the lowest point of the tank. Ideally, use new sample containers for each sample and clearly label them. And as per the recommendations laid out in ASTM D6469, which we covered briefly last time, if transporting to off-site facilities, ensure the samples are preserved in their current condition, for example, by transporting them on ice and testing them as quickly as possible. Why is good sampling important? As any scientist will tell you, test results can only be as accurate as the sample being tested. So it is important to take the time to get the best possible sample whilst avoiding the risks of cross-contamination. Remember, the aim of any sample to be tested for microbial contamination is to make it the most reflective sample it can be of the actual fuel system conditions. If not, the operation cannot make well-informed decisions, leading to potentially increased or unnecessary maintenance costs further down the line. Microbiological contamination is not something that will appear overnight and cause problems the next day. It is something that grows and builds over time. If left undetected and undisturbed, it can have significant impact on assets in terms of creating unplanned costs and disrupting system usage. These could be in the form of blocked filters, damage to fuel system components, corroded tanks, or a host of other impacts that may lead to unexpected repair and replacement costs, which can not only cause substantial operational disruption, but can cost vast sums of money in downtime, repair, and putting assets back into service. Ignoring the potential implications of microbiological contamination can pose threats to safety of life equipment, such as emergency backup power generators and aircraft integrity. but also potential environmental impacts, such as the corrosion of underground storage tanks, leading to fuel leakage into the environment. So we all have a responsibility to monitor and manage its effects. Water is the main component in the development of microbiological contamination issues. And whilst regular water draining will help minimize the risk, it is virtually impossible to eradicate it in its entirety, as it occurs naturally dissolved in the fuel and can be added through the likes of condensation whilst being transported through the fuel supply chain. Like you and I, these organisms are living things, and similarly to us, require water and a food source in order to survive. The fuel itself and the hydrocarbons in it act as the food source, whilst any water present can provide a habitat in which the bugs will grow and be able to access the nutrients. These bugs are microorganisms and consist mainly of bacteria and fungi, which includes yeasts or molds. You can see evidence of these types of organisms growing all around us, for example, on stale bread or cheese over a period of time. In fuel, the most commonly identified organism is Homoconus resinae, or HRES for short. But no need to worry too much about its official name. It commonly appears as a brownish black slime or sludge at the bottom or sides of your tank, or blocking filters. The main reason for taking a fuel sample from the bottom of a tank is that this is where the highest concentration of both bugs and water will be. So where possible, getting a water sample will provide a good representation of which bugs are growing in your fuel system. In order to understand a little better the antibody technology used in the FUELSTAT test kit, I shall give you some more familiar examples from the medical industry. Without going too deep into immunoassay, it's a test, an assay that copies our own immune system's way of detecting things. Or to be technical, a procedure for detecting or measuring specific proteins or other substances through their properties as antigens or antibodies. Now, whilst this still may be too much science for some of you, it is perhaps easier to understand if we use the above statement and relate it to something practical, such as the rapid COVID tests many countries are using to quickly identify, monitor, and try to control the spread of the virus. These tests are specifically looking for the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 and not the presence of anything else that might be there, such as viruses, bacteria, chemicals. Imagine the potential chaos it would cause if these COVID tests detected all viruses. We would all be in quarantine or rushed to hospital, all because we may have a cold or a host of other things. Antibody technology is used extensively in the medical industry, not least, of course, for the likes of pregnancy testing, but also for detecting heart disease or in anti-doping processes in sport. So the question is, if the technology is used and relied upon in the medical industry, how could this technology be used in the context of fuels? Well, in order to highlight this better, it's perhaps easier to understand if we highlight, very simply, that not all organisms are harmful to fuel. And for this, we have broken it down into 3 types. A, we have the primary fuel degraders, those that actively eat the fuel, causing damage and allowing other organisms to join the party. B, we've got the secondary degraders, which cannot directly degrade the fuel and actually would not exist without the presence of their better adapted brothers and sisters. And C, we have stray organisms, which can be of human, plant, or environmental sources and are not known to cause any harm to fuel, but they are around us all the time, in the air, in the dirt, on your hands, meaning that, unfortunately, they can enter a fuel sample during any part of the sampling, handling, and transport stages prior to sample testing. This is why we dedicated a whole session to sample collection last week, as for much testing, it is vital to avoid any cross-contamination. Now, consider the stray organisms for a moment. Would you really want to be acting upon generic results when in fact someone may have accidentally sneezed in the sample, or an operator did not wash their hands and accidentally touched the inside of the container? Probably not. So how are you able to identify whether you need to act or not and whether an organism is a stray? Well, you could get the sample properly DNA sequenced in a lab to give you an exact breakdown of all present organisms, but this can be very expensive and take some considerable time and a lot of technical know-how, not only to generate the results, but also to understand them. Alternatively, as FUELSTAT is designed to focus on the primary fuel degraders rather than stray organisms, you could have a very quick and targeted test which has a specific set of organisms in mind, completed on site without extensive training and a microbiology degree. In very simple terms, FUELSTAT has taken the principle of antibody testing, which, as we know, is widely used in the medical industry and is growing in its use at a rapid rate, and transferred it into a semi-quantitative test kit that seeks to identify the presence of specific organisms in a fast, simple manner, just like the rapid COVID tests. However, in the case of FUELSTAT, it is not seeking the presence of one virus, but 3 different groups: bacteria, fungi, and HRES, which you will remember as the delightful brown sludge from earlier. But how could using FUELSTAT's antibody technology help me, I hear you ask? Well, FUELSTAT seeks to search for only the primary fuel-degrading organisms associated with microbial contamination of fuel. These are characterized as being able to live upon fuel, can reproduce, and may create substances such as acids that can damage systems and associated components. As such, it is likely to give differing results from alternative tests, as the specific nature of antibody testing means that it avoids the background noise of stray organisms. They may well be present, but unlikely to pose a threat. So yes, FUELSTAT is different, but it is meant to be. Would you want to be self-isolating following a COVID test which had picked up that you had a cold and not actually COVID? The principle is similar. FUELSTAT continues to be different from a number of alternative tests in that it can be conducted in its entirety at the location the sample was originally drawn from, without the need for capital equipment, sterile facilities, or other consumables. It also provides results in minutes, not days or weeks. As it can be performed so quickly and on site, it reaps the benefit of using the freshest and most representative fuel sample possible, helping it adhere to the recommendations laid out in ASTM D6469. As FUELSTAT should not detect any stray human, plant, or environmental organisms which may be present and pose limited threat to the fuel, it could help to reduce the possibility of reacting to false positives or results that may be inflated by the presence of stray organisms. For those of you not familiar with the FUELSTAT product, this is what the test plate looks like. And as you can see, it looks a lot like 6 rapid COVID tests stuck together with a space to write on the bottom. It's a bit more complex than that, of course, but luckily all the science and complicated bits have been made into something that is very simple to use. This gives you a little idea. Next week, we will be discussing the digital platform that can be utilized in conjunction with the test itself to provide a basis for paperless reporting, auditing, transparency, and development of trend analysis. Next, we are going to run a very short video, so short, in fact, there is not enough time for in-film snacks. In very simple terms, FUELSTAT helps. It provides faster turnaround times, aiding faster responses to potential threats, and potentially reducing the need for repeat visits. It requires less than 5 minutes of somebody's time to actually perform the test itself. It is so simple it can be carried out by personnel with no specific training or experience, requiring no special equipment. As it uses antibody technology, it is able to ignore stray organisms such as those introduced into the sample by someone not washing their hands, or the sample being left exposed to the environment before being sealed. There is a free digital platform to provide operations with the data they may need very quickly from anywhere in the world, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Given the current pandemic, FUELSTAT can also be completely conducted from start to finish by one single individual, so it is suitable for solo working and remote locations. Each test only needs a few minutes labor and does not require special equipment, does not require special sterility considerations, transportation of the sample does not require skilled labor, and can be conducted at the source of the sample, giving good value for money. Its on-site nature provides organizations a better chance of minimizing the risk of sample degradation by negating the need to adhere to the recommendations laid out in the ASTM D6469 regarding sample transportation and testing times. On top of this, FUELSTAT can also provide a simpler and more secure sample chain of custody, as it reduces the need for multiple people to handle the sample when transporting it to off-site locations. This gives greater control over testing times and reduces the likelihood of cross-contamination. FUELSTAT also complies with ASTM D8070 and is already being used across the globe by users and fuel suppliers in various industries, from aviation to military, offshore exploration to fuel retail, and everything in between, as well as a growing number of transport fleets and sites using heavy equipment. So, just a few take-homes from this session are: a test is only as accurate as its sample. Try and be as representative as possible and preserve your sample when necessary. Antibody testing is a specific technology usually harnessed by the medical industry. Microorganisms come in all shapes and sizes. Understanding their role in microbial contamination and whether or not they are doing damage is important. And finally, FUELSTAT can help mitigate all these risks by providing specific, rapid on-site testing, helping you understand and make key decisions in the housekeeping of your fuel system. We hope that you have enjoyed the session. If you have any queries, comments, or feedback, please do not hesitate to contact us using the following details. We will only be too glad to assist. In the meantime, thank you for your time today, and from all of us here at Canidia Bioscience, we would like to wish you all, your families, friends, and fellow colleagues the very best of health and a pleasant remainder of the day.